Britain has become one of the most expensive places to live in the developed world. The average household now spends 36% of their income just on rent. Energy bills have settled at nearly double their pre-crisis levels. And even with recent wage increases, most workers find their pay packets buying less than they did 5 years ago. The numbers tell a stark story. Since 2021, new rental prices have surged 21% across the UK, with the average monthly rent now sitting at £1,301. Energy bills that once averaged around £1,200 annually now hover near £1,755 for the typical household, even after falling from their peak. Food prices jumped 5.1% in July 2025 alone, continuing a pattern of relentless increases that began 3 years ago. These aren't temporary spikes anymore, they're the new normal. When inflation hit 11.1% in October 2024, the highest in 41 years, it fundamentally reset the cost baseline for British life. Even though inflation has cooled to 3.8% by July 2025, prices remain stuck at those elevated levels. The average family's weekly shop that cost £100 in 2021 now costs £125, and there's no sign of it coming back down. What makes this particularly painful is that wages haven't kept pace. Yes, regular pay rose 4.8% year on year according to the latest data, but after adjusting for inflation, real wage growth sits at just 0.7%. Over the past decade, productivity growth, the engine that drives sustainable wage increases, has stalled almost completely. Output per hour in Q2 2025 was actually 0.8% lower than a year earlier and only 1.5% above 2019 levels. Housing stands at the centre of Britain's affordability crisis. The country simply hasn't built enough homes where people want to live, and the planning system makes catching up almost impossible. In England, only 234,400 net additional dwellings were delivered in 2022 to 2023, far below the 300,000 annual target that experts say is needed. The situation is actually getting worse. Planning permissions for housing fell to just 221,000 units in the year to June 2025, down from 237,000 the previous year. The number of residential decisions made by local authorities dropped 14%, while approvals fell 9%. In Q2 2025 alone, only 7,000 residential permissions were granted, 8% below the same quarter in 2024. This chronic undersupply has devastating consequences for affordability. The median private renter in England now pays 36.3% of their gross household income on rent, well above the 30% threshold that defines affordable housing. In many areas, the situation is even worse. London rents consume over half of median incomes, while even supposedly cheaper northern cities see rents taking between 30 and 40% of earnings. Construction costs compound the problem. Building materials remain expensive despite some easing from their 2022 peaks. The Building Cost Information Service projects construction costs will rise another 14 to 15% between 2025 and 2030. A single Type 26 frigate for the Royal Navy now costs over £1.2 billion, illustrating how construction inflation affects everything from housing to infrastructure. Meanwhile, mortgage rates have only recently begun to ease from their 2023 peaks. The Bank of England cut rates to 4% by September 2025, but this is still far above the ultra-low rates that prevailed before 2022. Combined with elevated house prices and stricter lending criteria, home ownership remains out of reach for millions. The energy crisis may have passed, but bills never return to their old levels. Ofgem's price cap for October to December 2025 sits at £1,755 for a typical dual-fuel household, roughly 37 to 44% above winter 2021 to 2022 levels. While this is far below the crisis peak that would have implied bills over £3,500 without government support, it represents a permanent step up in household costs. The reasons go beyond wholesale gas prices, which have normalized from their wartime extremes. Network costs keep rising as infrastructure needs upgrading. Policy costs for renewable energy support add more. Standing charges, the fixed daily cost everyone pays regardless of usage, remains contentious and elevated. Most importantly, Britain's housing stock wastes enormous amounts of energy through poor insulation, meaning households use more gas and electricity than necessary just to stay warm. Water bills are set to rise significantly too. Ofwat's investment programme for 2025 to 2030 will increase average bills by around £31 per year before inflation, as companies upgrade sewage systems and reduce leakage. Some water companies are appealing for even larger increases through the Competition and Markets Authority. These infrastructure improvements are necessary but add another layer to household costs. Food inflation has proven particularly stubborn. After cooling through 2024, it accelerated again to 5.1% in July 2025. The Competition and Markets Authority has investigated supermarket practices around unit pricing and loyalty schemes, finding areas where competition wasn't working effectively. But structural factors matter more. Britain imports nearly half of its food, making prices vulnerable to global shocks and currency movements. Transport costs pile on additional pressure. Petrol prices averaged 146 to 150 pence per litre through summer 2025, well above historical norms. The CMA found weakened competition in road fuels since 2019, with higher retail margins costing drivers over £1.6 billion in 2023 alone. They've mandated a real-time price comparison scheme called Fuel Finder to improve competition, but margins remain elevated. Motor insurance delivered another shock. After hitting record highs in 2023 and early 2024, premiums have eased somewhat but remain expensive. The Association of British Insurers reported average premiums of £562 in Q2 2025, down from £622 a year earlier but still far above pre-2022 levels. Record quarterly claims payouts continue to pressure prices. Rail fares keep rising annually in line with inflation, compounding over time. Bus fares benefit from a £2 single fare cap in many areas, but service cuts in some regions offset this relief. For millions dependent on public transport, especially outside major cities, getting to work keeps getting more expensive. Even phone and broadband bills have changed. From January 2025, Ofcom banned inflation-linked mid-contract price rises, requiring providers to show any increases upfront in pounds and pence. This improves predictability but doesn't necessarily lower costs. On the income side, multiple pressures compound the cost crisis. The Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts the tax-to-GDP ratio will reach 37.7% by 2027 to 2028, which is a modern record. This happens largely through fiscal drag. Income tax thresholds remain frozen while nominal wages rise, pulling more income into higher tax bands. Someone earning £30,000 pays more tax in real terms than they would have 5 years ago, even if their salary kept pace with inflation. Student loan repayments function as additional tax for graduates. Under Plan 5, covering students starting from 2023, the repayment threshold drops to £25,000 from April 2026, with interest set at RPI. This means more graduates repaying loans earlier and for longer, reducing their disposable income during prime earning years. Childcare costs have historically been among the world's highest in the UK. The government is expanding entitlements, with 30 hours per week from 9 months available from September 2025, potentially saving families up to £7,500 per child annually. But capacity constraints mean not everyone can access these benefits immediately, and many parents still face costs that dwarf their mortgage payments. The affordability crisis hits different regions differently. London has high costs but also high wages, keeping its poverty rate at 20%. The West Midlands sees 27% living in poverty despite most having jobs. The North East hits 26%. These aren't unemployment black spots, but working poverty hotspots where wages haven't kept pace with living costs. Population growth adds pressure. The ONS estimates England and Wales's population grew by around 707,000 in the year to mid-2024, the second largest annual increase in over 75 years. Net migration reached 431,000 in 2024 after policy changes reduced it from even higher levels. England's population is projected to grow 6.4% between 2022 and 2032. When housing supply can't match this demand, rents and prices inevitably rise. Exchange rate movements amplify import costs. Sterling's depreciation since 2015 to 2016 passed through to customers' prices with a lag. When the pound fell, everything from food to fuel to customer goods gets more expensive, and these increases rarely reverse when sterling recovers. The Bank of England has extensively studied this pass-through effect, confirming its material impact on living costs. Underlying everything is Britain's productivity crisis. Output per hour barely grows anymore, which means sustainable wage increases become impossible. The Office for Budget Responsibility is preparing to downgrade its medium-term productivity assumptions further. When workers don't produce more per hour, employers can't pay more without raising prices, creating the inflation wage spiral we've experienced. Business investment remains volatile, bouncing in early 2025 before dipping again in Q2. This stop-start pattern, combined with persistent uncertainty, prevents the capital deepening that would boost productivity. Without better tools, technology, and infrastructure, British workers can't compete on productivity with their international peers, keeping wages suppressed even as costs rise. The financial sector's dominance hasn't helped most workers. While London's financial services generate enormous wealth, this doesn't translate into good jobs for former manufacturing workers in the Midlands or the North. The economy's tilt towards services that require specific qualification leaves millions of workers competing for lower paid roles in retail, hospitality, and logistics. Many people wonder why everything still feels expensive when inflation has fallen from its peak. The answer is simple but painful. Inflation measures the rate of change, not the level. Prices that rose 20% over 22 to 23 and then grow 3 to 4% in 25 are still over 20% higher than in 21. Food, rent, and energy exemplify this. They've stopped rising as fast, but they haven't come down. Structural factors ensure many costs remain elevated. Housing supply constraints persist regardless of inflation rates. Water and energy companies must invest billions in infrastructure. Costs pass to consumers. Brexit reduced trade intensity by 15% according to official estimates, permanently raising import costs. Insurance claims for cars remain elevated due to expensive parts and labor. These aren't cyclical issues that improve when inflation falls. They're structural changes requiring policy solutions. The global context matters too. The Ukraine conflict disrupted grain supplies, with Ukrainian grain exports down 24% in 23 to 24. Climate change increases extreme weather events, affecting food production and insurance costs. China's economic shifts impact global supply chains. Britain, as a major importer, feels all these pressures acutely. For the average worker, these combined pressures create an impossible equation. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation calculated that a single person needs £29,500 annually for a basic, decent life in 2025. A couple with 2 children needs £50,000, yet median full-time earnings sit around £35,000, and many workers earn far less, especially in part-time or gig economy roles. The Work Foundation identified 6.8 million people in severely insecure work, 0-hour contracts, bogus self-employment, involuntary part-time work, or temporary contracts. These workers face income volatility on top of high costs. A delivery driver might work 60 hours one week and 20 the next, making budgeting impossible. A warehouse worker might have steady hours but earns just enough to cover basics, with nothing left for emergencies. Professional workers aren't immune either. An IT consultant earning £45,000 might sound comfortable, but after tax, student loans, rent, and living costs, they're left with minimal savings. A manufacturing engineer in Birmingham faces housing costs that consume a third of their gross pay, childcare that takes another quarter, leaving barely enough for food and transport. The middle-class lifestyle that parents enjoyed on similar jobs has become unattainable. Solutions exist, but require political will and long-term thinking. Dramatically increasing housing supply in high-demand areas would ease rent and purchase prices. This means reforming planning laws, investing in infrastructure, and potentially overriding local objections to development. The government's target of 1.5 million homes over a parliament represents a start, but delivery matters more than promises. Improving productivity requires sustained business investment, better skills training, and infrastructure upgrades. The UK needs to move beyond its reliance on financial services and low productivity service jobs. Manufacturing, technology, and green industries could provide better paid employment, but needs supportive policies and patient capital. Energy efficiency improvements could significantly reduce bills. Insulating Britain's leaky housing stock would cut energy waste, reducing both costs and carbon emissions. The upfront investment is substantial, but the long-term savings for households and the environment justify it. Reforming the tax and benefit system could ease the squeeze on workers. Raising tax thresholds in line with inflation would reduce fiscal drag. Reforming universal credit to better support work, rather than penalizing additional earnings, would help low-paid workers escape poverty. Making childcare more genuinely affordable and accessible would enable more parents to work full-time. Britain's affordability crisis stems from multiple interconnected failures: insufficient housing supply, stagnant productivity, elevated energy and food costs, rising taxes, and wages that haven't kept pace with prices. Until these structural issues are addressed, millions of workers will continue struggling despite doing everything right, and the UK will remain one of the most expensive places to live relative to incomes.